"You can't just leave me here," I whispered to the wind as the rain pounded my umbrella like a drum, soaking my coat through and chilling me to the bone. My boots slipped on the slick sidewalk as I rounded the corner and froze, spotting a man slumped against the side of a brick building, dark liquid staining his shirt, his breathing shallow and ragged. And I didn't think. I just ran to him, heart hammering, hands shaking, dragging my jacket off to press it against his chest, murmuring, "Hang on. You're going to be okay." But the storm was relentless, lightning splitting the sky, wind tearing my hair across my face, and every shadow seemed to move, alive and watching. He stirred, eyes opening, ice blue and piercing, scanning me with a careful intensity that made my stomach twist, power radiating from him even in this vulnerable moment. Yet there was a thread of something softer hidden beneath that calculated gaze, and I felt both fear and an inexplicable pull, adrenaline spiking his eye. Supported his weight, trying to guide him away from the rain-slick alley into the relative shelter of a recessed doorway, my fingers brushing against the damp fabric of his coat, cold and heavy, and he made no sound, only his eyes tracking every motion, following every breath I took. And for a moment the world shrank to just the two of us, the roar of the storm fading into the background, each heartbeat loud and urgent. I whispered again, "You're not alone." And finally, he shifted, leaning slightly against me, and I realized he trusted me, an acknowledgement without words, a fragile bond forged in chaos. And I felt a strange mixture of empowerment and terror, knowing that the next step was entirely up to us, the city's shadows stretching long and dark around us, rainwater pooling at our feet, light reflecting in puddles like fractured glass. And I clung to the thought that whatever had brought us together in this storm was more than coincidence, that it was the start of something inevitable, something neither of us fully understood yet. But I couldn't look away from those piercing eyes, calculating, aware, alive, and I held him close just a little longer, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing, feeling the weight of responsibility settle over me like the rain itself, the thunder cracking above punctuating the tension in my chest. And I knew this was only the beginning, that every second counted, every movement mattered, and that the storm outside was nothing compared to the storm that had just begun between us. The rain continued to pour over the city streets, turning every surface into a reflective mirror of neon and wet asphalt. And Samantha Reed guided Dominic Romano into the narrow alcove of a closed coffee shop, her hands shaking but precise as she helped him lean against the brick wall, the sound of water sluicing around their feet, creating a rhythm that matched the quick pounding of her heart. She tore a strip from her scarf to bind gently around his arm where the cut had opened again, each movement deliberate, careful, and Dominic did not flinch, his piercing eyes studying her with a quiet intensity that made her stomach twist, the cold steel of the night air blending with the warmth of their close proximity, his breathing slow but measured. And for a moment the world outside seemed to vanish, leaving only the two of them and the rhythmic patter of rain against the corrugated awning overhead, while she whispered instructions and reassurances that she barely believed herself, her fingers brushing against the damp fabric of his shirt, cold yet heavy with the subtle power that radiated from him, a controlled authority that kept her simultaneously safe and on edge. And she noticed the way his jaw tensed and relaxed with each word, the sharp outline of his cheekbones catching the faint light from the street lamp, the glint of his eyes like fractured ice reflecting the storm, making her aware of every movement, every breath, every decision. She adjusted her stance, keeping his body supported, her own muscles aching from exertion and tension, but she refused to falter, knowing that any hesitation could unbalance the fragile trust forming between them. And she felt a strange connection building, a silent acknowledgement of reliance that neither had spoken, the storm around them both a physical and emotional mirror, the wind tugging at her hair, the rain soaking through her coat, and Dominic leaned slightly, just enough to shift some of his weight onto her, his gaze never leaving hers, measuring, assessing. And in that quiet, charged moment, Samantha realized that despite the danger, despite the uncertainty of the night and the unrelenting storm, there was an unspoken promise between them, a fragile thread that tethered their fates together. And she met his eyes with equal intensity, recognizing that whatever had brought them to this moment had irrevocably altered the course of their evening, and perhaps much more. The city lights blurred into streaks of color across the wet street as she guided him step by cautious step toward the recessed doorway, each movement deliberate, each breath a tether to reality. And as they reached the cover, she felt the first tiny flicker of relief, a quiet acknowledgement that they had survived the immediate danger together. But the tension remained, thick and palpable. The storm outside a constant reminder that the world beyond the alley still held challenges, decisions, and consequences yet unseen. And she adjusted her grip, glanced at him once more, and whispered, "We are going to make it through this," knowing that in that glance, in that shared heartbeat, a connection had been forged that neither could deny. The alley was dimly lit, the reflections from puddles casting distorted shapes against the brick walls as Samantha Reed supported Dominic Romano, guiding him carefully toward a narrow staircase that led to a small maintenance door slightly ajar. The scent of wet concrete and ozone filling her nostrils and mingling with the subtle, commanding presence of Dominic beside her. His calm breathing and steady posture grounding her nerves as she maneuvered around scattered debris, each step measured, each movement precise. And she could feel the tension coiling in her shoulders, the rain dripping from her hair onto her coat, her fingers brushing against his sleeve to steady him, the faint pulse of his heartbeat matching the rhythm of her own. And she noticed how his gaze softened slightly when he realized she was struggling, offering a wordless acknowledgement that built trust in the silence. While the city around them hummed with the distant sound of traffic and the patter of rain against metal and asphalt, a constant reminder that they were exposed. Yet the alcove and staircase offered fragile sanctuary, their shadows stretching along the walls as they climbed. And Samantha felt a surge of determination mixed with apprehension, her breath visible in the cool night air as she whispered instructions and encouragement, her voice a thread connecting them in that precarious moment. And Dominic responded with subtle nods, an almost imperceptible shift in posture signaling his awareness and appreciation of her careful guidance, the tension between safety and urgency pressing against her chest like a weight. But she pressed forward, each step deliberate, every glance scanning the environment for obstacles, the dim light catching his sharp features, the dark hair damp against his forehead, the subtle intensity in his stormy blue eyes unwavering even as he leaned slightly on her for support. And she felt the gravity of responsibility settle over her, knowing that the fragile trust they had built in minutes could be shattered by a single misstep. Yet there was an unspoken understanding, a silent communication through gestures and the cadence of their movements that bound them together in that fleeting pocket of time. And as they reached the doorway at the top of the staircase, Samantha carefully pushed it open, revealing a narrow corridor lined with utility closets, the sound of dripping water echoing off the walls, and she guided Dominic inside, closing the door gently behind them. The air inside warmer and drier, a brief respite from the storm, and she allowed herself a moment to catch her breath, noting the subtle shift in Dominic's posture as he leaned against the wall, eyes still observing, but with a flicker of recognition that she had not only helped him, but had done so with courage and determination. The adrenaline of the night slowly giving way to a quiet, tense calm, and Samantha realized that the night was far from over, that every second still held potential peril and opportunity. Yet in that moment, in the dim glow of a single flickering light above, she felt a connection, a fragile tether that had formed through shared experience, through the storm, through proximity and trust. And she met his gaze, holding it just long enough to convey that she understood the importance of the moment, that she was present, alert, and committed to the task at hand. And Dominic, silent but expressive, acknowledged her effort with the smallest incline of his head, a wordless promise that this was only the beginning of a journey neither of them could yet fully grasp, the corridor stretching ahead like a vein of possibility and uncertainty. And Samantha felt the weight of anticipation, the tension of unknown paths before them, each breath synchronized with the subtle rhythm of their proximity, each step a negotiation between care and urgency, the storm outside a distant echo as they paused briefly in the stillness, knowing that the night would demand more, that choices and trust would continue to intertwine. And in that brief pause, she felt a quiet determination settle in, the kind that comes from stepping into uncertainty with courage, and Dominic's presence beside her, commanding and silent, reinforced the gravity and potential of everything yet to come. The narrow corridor smelled faintly of damp concrete and old paint, and Samantha Reed took a careful step forward, Dominic Romano following her silently, his presence a constant anchor against the tension that still lingered in the air, each of them moving with deliberate caution as shadows flickered against the walls from the single overhead light, the storm outside now a distant percussion against the metal rooftop above. And Samantha adjusted the makeshift bandage she had tied around his arm, her fingers brushing against the fabric, the warmth of his skin beneath sending a subtle reminder of the life she was holding steady with each careful motion. And Dominic watched her closely, the intensity in his stormy blue eyes tempered by an acknowledgement of her skill and determination, a wordless message that her efforts had not gone unnoticed, while the quiet drip of water echoed through the hallway, each droplet a reminder of the fragile stillness around them. And Samantha felt the weight of responsibility settle over her like the lingering humidity, the rhythm of her heartbeat synchronized with the steadying of Dominic's posture as she guided him past a series of utility doors, the faint hum of the city beyond muffled by the thick concrete, creating a cocoon of temporary safety. And she spoke softly, her voice barely above a whisper, offering reassurance and direction. Just a little further. We are almost there. And Dominic inclined his head slightly, the faintest shift in his stance communicating trust and patience, a mutual understanding forming between them in the quiet moments where actions spoke louder than words. And as they reached a small landing with a stairwell leading upward, Samantha paused to catch her breath, noting the subtle way Dominic adjusted his footing, steadying himself yet remaining aware of every step, every movement she made. A silent coordination that required no verbal exchange, and she felt the thread of connection tighten, an invisible line that linked their intentions and careful navigation. The storm of emotions within her mirrored by the storm that had raged outside moments ago, now replaced by a tense anticipation, and she guided him onto the staircase, each step producing a measured creak against the worn metal, the light above flickering slightly, casting long shadows across their faces and emphasizing the sharp features of Dominic, his eyes never leaving hers, conveying attention and awareness in every glance. And Samantha felt both courage and apprehension surge through her, understanding that the moment required complete focus and presence. And as they ascended, the corridor seemed to stretch endlessly, a pathway defined by trust, mutual reliance, and the quiet understanding that this shared challenge had already begun to change the dynamic between them. And she could sense the subtle shift in the energy around Dominic, a rare acknowledgement of respect and appreciation for the determination and care she exhibited. And Samantha whispered again, more to herself than to him, "We will get through this together," feeling the words resonate with the rhythm of their steps. And as they reached the top landing, the door at the end of the stairwell came into view, slightly ajar and beckoning as a promise of temporary refuge. And Samantha pushed it open carefully, guiding Dominic inside, closing it behind them with a gentle click, the faint warmth of the space embracing them, a momentary reprieve, while the lingering awareness of the night outside reminded them that the storm had only been the first of many challenges. And in the quiet that followed, Samantha met Dominic's gaze, reading the unspoken appreciation, the acknowledgement of trust, and the weight of unspoken questions, each of them acutely aware that this night had set into motion a connection neither fully understood yet, a connection that would demand vigilance, courage, and careful navigation in the moments to come. The small room smelled faintly of damp air and old wood, a quiet refuge from the relentless rain outside, and Samantha Reed steadied herself against the wall as she guided Dominic Romano to a chair, his movements slow and deliberate, each breath measured as she adjusted the damp fabric around his shoulders, her hands steady despite the lingering tension and adrenaline from the alley. And she noticed the subtle way his eyes followed her every action, stormy blue reflecting the faint overhead light, intense yet calm, assessing without judgment. And she felt a strange reassurance in his presence, a silent acknowledgement of trust and reliance forming between them. while the distant hum of the city and the rhythmic drip of water from a leaky vent created a backdrop that heightened the intimacy of the moment without words. The quiet punctuated only by the soft shuffle of their movements and the muted thump of her own heartbeat echoing in her ears, and she murmured instructions gently. "Lean back a little. Just relax. You are safe now." And he inclined. Slightly, a nod rather than a word. The smallest gesture conveying gratitude and recognition of her careful attention. The way his jaw relaxed subtly, shoulders easing as he settled into the chair, and Samantha felt the weight of responsibility lift just enough to breathe. Though every instinct remained alert to potential threats, the tension of the night still wrapped around them like the wet coat on her shoulders. And she adjusted the makeshift bandage, pressing gently to ensure it stayed secure without causing discomfort, her fingers brushing against his skin with a careful precision that conveyed both reassurance and authority. And Dominic's gaze lingered, unwavering, the storm outside a distant echo now replaced by the pulse of shared presence, their unspoken communication growing in depth, every small glance and movement loaded with understanding. And Samantha felt the quiet thrill of having guided them both to this point, a fragile equilibrium achieved through courage, determination, and careful attention. While the room offered a temporary sanctuary from the chaos outside, the shadows on the walls shifting with the flicker of a single light overhead, painting elongated silhouettes that mirrored the tension and bond between them. And as she stepped back slightly to assess their situation, she noticed a subtle softness in Dominic's posture, a rare acknowledgement that her efforts had mattered, that trust had been built in a matter of minutes under the storm. The room's narrow confines amplifying each motion, each sound, heightening awareness and focus, and Samantha realized that in this shared moment, there was an unspoken promise, a tether of reliability and courage, a silent assurance that despite the unknowns ahead, they were no longer alone, and the storm of the night outside had transformed into a storm of connection and awareness between them, a tension and anticipation that held them together and hinted at challenges and revelations yet to unfold as she met his eyes, holding them just long enough to convey understanding, determination, and readiness. And Dominic returned the gaze with equal measure, an acknowledgement that their journey together, uncertain and fraught with risk, had only begun. And in that suspended moment, with rain fading to distant patter and the city lights glinting through the small window, Samantha felt the fragile bond solidifying, an invisible thread linking their fates, each aware that the night had changed everything, and that the hours ahead would require courage, focus, and trust to navigate what lay beyond the temporary refuge of this quiet room. The rain outside had finally softened to a gentle drizzle, the streetlights reflecting off the wet pavement in a soft golden haze, and Samantha Reed stood by the small window, adjusting the damp strands of hair that clung to her face, while Dominic Romano sat nearby, his posture relaxed but still exuding a subtle command over the space, every movement precise and controlled, and she could not help but notice the way his eyes followed her, assessing, silent, powerful, yet not intrusive, as she moved to gather a few clean towels and water bottles from a corner shelf, her fingers brushing against the cold metal handle with careful precision, each sound amplified in the quiet room, the soft patter of remaining rain outside creating a steady, hypnotic rhythm, a backdrop to the quiet tension and developing connection between them. And as she handed him a towel to dab at the edges of the bandage, his fingers brushed briefly against hers, a fleeting, unspoken acknowledgement of trust and appreciation, and Samantha felt a subtle warmth spread through her chest, a mixture of relief and the thrill of having guided them both to this moment safely, while every sense remained alert, listening to the distant sounds of the city beyond the walls, the hum of traffic, the occasional clatter of debris moved by the wind. Yet the room felt suspended in time, a bubble of relative safety where each careful glance and measured step carried weight and meaning. And she spoke softly, keeping her tone steady. "You are doing fine, just breathe." And Dominic inclined his head, stormy blue eyes meeting hers, holding a look that conveyed acknowledgement without words, the smallest nod of understanding. And she felt the unspoken bond between them deepen, an intricate thread of reliance and awareness formed through the shared intensity of the night. and as she adjusted a towel under his arm, the movement caused a subtle shift, his gaze lingering just long enough to communicate recognition of her care, and the quiet in the room amplified the exchange. The gentle flicker of the overhead light casting soft shadows across their faces, highlighting sharp features and expressions that spoke more than words ever could. And Samantha realized that in this stillness, they were connected by more than circumstance. There was a shared understanding, a mutual reliance forged under pressure. The storm outside a distant echo compared to the current focus and attention required within these walls, and she felt the rhythm of her own heartbeat synchronize with the subtle rise and fall of Dominic's chest, the soft intake of breath, the careful movements of hands and eyes, each action deliberate, each gesture laden with meaning. A dance of trust and awareness unfolding without verbal confirmation. And as she stepped back slightly to assess their progress, Dominic's gaze held hers again, piercing but calm, intense yet patient, conveying a silent assurance that they had navigated the immediate challenges together, and that despite the unknowns that lay ahead beyond the temporary refuge of this room, they were now aligned in a way that would carry them forward, each aware of the other's presence, intentions, and care. The quiet of the space a stark contrast to the chaos of the storm that had brought them here, and Samantha felt the confidence swell within her, knowing that in the shared attention, the careful coordination, and the silent communication, they had created a fragile yet unbreakable tether, a foundation of trust and mutual respect that would guide the remainder of the night and perhaps define what came next. The dim light of the small refuge flickered gently, casting long shadows across the walls as Samantha Reed adjusted a damp strand of hair from her face, her eyes scanning the room while Dominic Romano remained seated, calm yet vigilant, his presence a silent reassurance that grounded her racing thoughts. The storm outside had softened into a distant patter, but the tension in the room remained taut, a quiet electricity that neither dared break, and Samantha moved carefully, arranging a small stack of towels and setting out a bottle of water, her fingers brushing against the cold surface, each movement deliberate, mindful, and observed by Dominic with an intensity that made her acutely aware of the connection between them. The way he noted every gesture, every breath, without judgment, yet with a presence that demanded attention, and she felt the subtle weight of responsibility, the awareness that her actions could influence both their safety and the fragile trust that had been established in minutes of shared urgency. And she whispered softly, "We are safe for now," feeling the words resonate not just in the space, but between them, as Dominic inclined his head slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement, the smallest movement carrying volumes of meaning, and she felt a quiet warmth from knowing that he recognized her care, a reassurance that transcended words, while the quiet rhythm of dripping water and the muffled hum of the city beyond provided a constant backdrop, each sound amplified in the silence, highlighting the intimacy of the shared space. And as she moved closer to adjust the bandage on his arm, the faintest brush of his sleeve against hers elicited a surge of connection, a mutual recognition that trust had been earned and respect established. And in that suspended moment, the room became a cocoon, a fragile sanctuary where each glance, each measured breath, each deliberate step conveyed volumes. The storm outside a memory, replaced by the subtle storm of awareness and unspoken communication between them. And Samantha felt the pulse of adrenaline mingling with relief, the awareness that this night had woven their fates together in ways neither could yet fully understand. And she spoke again in a soft, steady tone. "You are doing well, just a little longer." And Dominic's eyes met hers, calm, focused, appreciative, conveying acknowledgement without words, his presence a stabilizing force, the subtle incline of his head a silent promise that the effort, the care, and the attention she had poured into ensuring their safety had been noticed, and the quiet stretched between them, rich with the unspoken understanding that this moment marked a turning point, a shared experience that had established a connection beyond circumstance, the narrow space around them amplifying the nuances of expression, movement, and gaze, each element a brushstroke painting the invisible thread that tethered them together. And Samantha felt a quiet determination settle within her, the awareness that despite the uncertainties ahead, they had navigated this part of the night together, every choice, every careful motion contributing to a bond forged in the intensity of shared focus, trust, and mutual reliance. And as the flickering light continued its soft rhythm, shadows dancing along the walls, she met Dominic's gaze once more, understanding that this unspoken exchange, measured and deliberate, would guide the remainder of the night, and that the connection formed here, in this fragile, fleeting pause, had already begun to shape the course of the hours yet to come. A quiet, powerful tether that neither could ignore. The storm outside had finally faded into a distant drizzle, and Samantha Reed felt the weight of exhaustion settling into her shoulders. Yet her focus remained sharp as she guided Dominic Romano to a slightly wider space within the small refuge, a temporary alcove with a single flickering light casting long, soft shadows across the walls. She adjusted the damp scarf around his shoulders, the fabric cool against his skin, her fingers careful and deliberate, and he observed every movement with a quiet intensity that both unnerved and reassured her, his stormy blue eyes reflecting the faint light, reading her actions, noting her determination, and communicating without words a subtle acknowledgement of trust and appreciation, while the gentle hum of the city beyond the walls and the faint drip of water from a leaky vent provided a rhythmic backdrop that contrasted the quiet tension between them. And Samantha found herself silently measuring each step, each gesture, conscious of the fragile thread of connection that had formed, the unspoken understanding that each movement could either strengthen or destabilize the trust built in these past moments of shared focus and careful attention. And as she knelt briefly to rearrange the makeshift bandage, her fingers brushing against his skin with careful precision, she whispered softly, "We are almost through this, just a little longer." And Dominic inclined his head slightly, a nod that carried more meaning than words, a silent recognition of her effort, and a subtle promise that the temporary safety of this moment was noted, a mutual acknowledgement that the events of the night had created a bond neither could ignore, the quiet allowing every nuance of expression and gaze to be amplified, the flicker of light casting delicate patterns across Dominic's sharp features, highlighting the subtle shift of his jaw, the faint crease of his forehead, and the controlled, deliberate movements that radiated calm authority and reassurance simultaneously. And Samantha felt a swell of quiet determination, the awareness that she had navigated them both to this point safely, the thread of reliance between them strengthened by every careful motion, every shared breath, and every unspoken gesture. While the storm of the night faded into memory, the city beyond still alive but distant, leaving only the focused intensity within the room, and she realized that in this suspended moment, the connection forged under urgency and care had transformed into a fragile yet unbreakable tether, a link of mutual understanding and trust, each aware of the other's presence, intentions, and attention, the subtle rhythm of Dominic's breathing matched by her own, each small movement echoing the depth of their shared experience. And as Samantha rose slightly, adjusting her posture to better support him, their eyes met once more, communicating volumes without a single word, the quiet between them rich with anticipation and recognition that the night had irrevocably intertwined their fates, the temporary refuge of the room emphasizing the bond, the careful, deliberate coordination, and the shared awareness that would guide them through whatever challenges remained ahead, a tether of connection built from courage, focus, and empathy. And in that moment, Samantha felt the gravity and the significance of what had unfolded, understanding that the bond forged in the quiet, in the attention and care, would influence every step of the night yet to come, a subtle, powerful promise of trust and reliance that neither could deny. The storm had fully passed, leaving only a soft drizzle tapping against the window, and Samantha Reed felt the cool night air settle over her shoulders as she moved carefully to arrange a blanket over Dominic Romano, his posture relaxed yet commanding, a presence that filled the room with quiet authority and subtle reassurance. And she noticed the faint way his eyes followed her, stormy blue meeting hers with an intensity that both anchored and unsettled her, while the muted hum of the city outside and the rhythmic patter of residual rain created a steady backdrop, each sound amplifying the weight of the shared moments between them. And as she adjusted the blanket, Dominic inclined his head slightly, the movement a silent acknowledgement of her attention and care, his gaze steady, assessing, conveying more in a single glance than words ever could, and Samantha felt a surge of quiet pride, the recognition that the night had forged a delicate trust, a tether that bound them through focus, attention, and mutual reliance. Every breath, every small gesture reinforcing the fragile connection. The quiet room now a sanctuary, a pause from the chaos of the world outside, and she stepped back slightly to assess, noting the subtle relaxation in his shoulders, the calm in his stance, the quiet gratitude that passed unspoken. A signal that their actions together had mattered, that the bond formed under pressure had solidified, and the shadows flickering across the walls seemed to echo the unspoken understanding, each movement of light and shade reflecting the rhythm of their synchronized awareness, while the stormy blue of his eyes caught the light for a brief second, revealing a depth of focus and unspoken appreciation that made her chest tighten with anticipation, and Samantha adjusted her posture, smoothing the edges of the blanket, her movements precise, deliberate, each gesture a reinforcement of trust and care, and Dominic's gaze remained on her, unwavering, acknowledging the courage and effort she had shown in guiding them to this moment of respite. The quiet amplified the nuances of expression, breath, and gesture, a dance of understanding and connection without a single word spoken, and Samantha felt the tether between them grow stronger, a silent communication of mutual reliance, awareness, and the unspoken promise that they would navigate what remained together, each aware of the other's presence and the shared responsibility they now carried, while the room's shadows stretched along the walls, amplifying the intensity of the unbroken eye contact and the unspoken acknowledgement. And as she stood there, adjusting her stance, she realized the night had irrevocably shifted the balance between them. The storm outside only a distant memory, replaced by the quiet storm of attention, focus, and mutual recognition within the room, and she felt a sense of anticipation, knowing that this night, this shared experience, had created a bond that would influence every step of the journey ahead, a connection forged through presence, courage, and careful attention. And as she met Dominic's eyes one final time in that suspended moment, the intensity of the gaze carried a promise, a recognition, and a quiet power that neither of them could ignore. And Samantha understood that the tether they had formed would guide the unfolding hours, a silent, powerful reminder that the night had changed everything and that their shared path, uncertain yet aligned, was only beginning.